We are connected, and now we are in 1 Samuel chapter 14. We're going to start at verse 15 and go through the rest of the chapter. We stopped in the middle last week, and it's all dealing with Saul and the Philistines. We were at an earthquake, if you will remember. Jonathan has got the Israelites into a battle as they attacked a little bit of a little stronghold or an area that's where the Philistines are at in Israel, in their land. And he and one other guy, his armor bearer, went and attacked them, and they beat them, and they had the rest of them on the run. And now they're trying to form up together, and Saul is not wanting to take any part of this. He's just kind of laid back. He's underneath a tree. What kind of a tree? A pomegranate tree. And so a nice little shade where he's at, and his son stirs up some trouble because his son actually is godly, and he knows God's word, and he knows how the character of God is, and he decides that we are supposed to beat all of the enemies. So if nobody else is going to do it, he's going to do it, him and his armor bearer. And actually they do, as they had these rocky crags. And where Avell was out in Utah, he had a picture where there was a crag. Did you see that one? Is it like the next day we saw that or something, or that night? I don't know when you first started posting them, but there was one hill up here and there was a hill up here. And it was real rocky and craggy, and I thought, that looks just like the picture that they have in the Encyclopedia Bible that shows where this area would have been. And I'm going, this is in Utah. This is where they're at.
I think maybe the Mormon church had it moved there.
That's good. That's
that spot.
Yeah, like that. Maybe that's what it was. Well, what happens as the Philistines gather together? Now, what Jonathan has them on the run. They beat 20 guys up there. They can pretty well hold off anybody in that area. And somehow Jonathan and the armor bearer are able to beat them. And then God starts doing his supernatural thing. So point number one is shaking up the enemy. A normal earthquake, and we look at what? Verse 15, there was a trembling in the camp, and the field, and among all the people, even the garrison and the raiders trembled. And the raiders are all over kind of Israel there. They're just about, and they're wreaking havoc in all across the land. Little special forces, I guess you could call them. And the garrison and the raiders trembled, and the earth quaked so that it became a great trembling. Now, first thing we got to think about, and we talked about this a little bit last week, but now this sets us up for the rest of our chapter. Even a normal earthquake, and whatever normal earthquake is, would have rattled the Philistines, right? I don't think this is a normal earthquake. This is a supernatural earthquake. It's extraordinary, and I think the timing is just perfect with what Jonathan and his armor bearer have done. It's a limited victory for them because they just beat 20 guys there, holding off that area. But this earthquake seems kind of limited too. It's just happening to be where the Philistines are at and not where the Israelites are at. Matter of fact, most of the Israelites have no idea what's going on. All they know is there's a rumbling and tumbling over there, and it's them killing each other. They hear this noise, and it's not happening to them. They're not aware at all. The impact is terrifying. The Philistine soldiers are wondering what is going on. It's like thunder, it's like cannons booming. This is a significant earthquake. They're trembling. Soldiers are just trembling. They don't know what to do. They're reeling about. They're falling. It's like waves are rolling up, when you have an earthquake. And, whether it be horizontal or vertical, everything is just rumbling and moving. And you have a lot of casualties here. A lot of casualties. Swords are drawn, and they think maybe the enemy is coming. They don't know what's going on, and there it is. They start, like you could have an instrument, a sword, It's out kind of like what a bayonet would be, and have it out like that, and there you are. There are people in front of you, and boom, you stab a guy in the back with it. He turns around, and then he thinks it's the enemy, and he starts attacking him, and they're just dying all over the place. What a scene that was. The Israelites are wondering what is going on. Well, Jonathan has an idea. God's working here. So the roar of the earthquake, they're terrified. There's a panic. Soldiers are disabled, and God is intervening mightily like he does. Ground is opening up in certain areas. Something marvelous is really happening. This is a supernatural God. He's done this before, and he'll do it again. And he's done it in our time with the Israelis, 1948, and into the 60s. God miraculously had the enemy killing themselves whenever they thought they were being attacked by Piper Cubs with Molotov cocktails. You've heard of that, right? And Israel won that, had not a chance humanly. Now, what happens is we move on here. Let's read 16. Saul's watchman in Gibeah of Benjamin looked, and behold. Remember, every time you see behold, it's like, look at this. The multitude melted away, and they went here and there. This is the enemy. Saul said to the people who were with him, number now and see who has gone from us. I want you to catch that. And when they had numbered, behold, Jonathan and his armor bearer were not there. Are you catching what's going on?
Who's over there doing what?
Yeah, he calls a roll call. Usually it's for for whoever's there. This is for who's not there. Guess who's not there? His son and his armor bearer. That's who's not here.
So do you think Saul might have had an idea?
I think he's got an idea. This has happened before. Do you think Saul likes that? Saul doesn't want any troubles. He's done his thing. He beat the Amalekites, right? Is that who it was that he had defeated, right? I might be getting into the wrong one there. But the thing is, he had defeated them. But the Philistines are another thing. They're underneath their rule, and let's just don't mess with them. Jonathan's caused enough trouble. Well, he numbers them, and sure enough, it's Jonathan. Do you think Saul is surprised at all? No. He pretty well figured, everything's been going well enough for Saul. He's the king. They hire him as king for the reason of what? To defeating the enemies around them. And he's not doing it. He defeated one enemy, but that's not enough. And so there he's been sitting underneath the tree, and all this happens. Jonathan is messing everything up for him. His own son. It's definitely not a situation that a father would like to see. He had attacked a Philistine garrison before in chapter 13. So there's a massive buildup of Philistine soldiers, tens of thousands. How many men does Saul and Jonathan have? Is it 600? Yeah. So Saul manages to avoid any kind of major disturbance, and all of a sudden this commotion starts up. He calls roll. He doesn't think first of God. His troublemaking son is the first thing that we see. Jonathan is a good, godly man. And he's not among them. And Saul's going to trouble again. So he's a reluctant king. The warriors are going to go into battle. The commotion here becomes so great that Saul concludes that an attack against this means certain victory here. We can go get them now. And so we read on in 17, we see that he numbers for that reason. Verse 18, Saul said to Ahijah, bring the ark of God here. What sounds like he wants to ask of God, doesn't he? the ark of God? And is it really the same ark that we've always had, or is there maybe something else here that is involved? Anyway, my version says ark of God. It's supposed to be the magic cure-all anyway, right? Rely on that, we'll win. Was that time with the sons of Israel. While Saul talked to the priest, the commotion in the camp of the Philistines continued and increased. So Saul said to the priest, so he's there with the priest who has the ephod. You can ask the will of God. You know what? God's not going to answer. Withdraw your hand. Saul says, forget about it. We don't need to ask of God. There it is right there. Let's go for him. So here we go. Saul and all the people who were with him rallied and came to the battle, and behold, every man's sword was against his fellow, and there was very great confusion. That is the Philistines. They're killing each other. So a lot of them are on the run. They're getting out of there. They don't know what's going on. Now the Hebrews who were with the Philistines previously, remember the traitors? They're like the rhinos. The Republican Party, they're all bailing out right now because they know that they may be arrested or killed. And even, I think, the Supreme Court and all the circuit court judges and all of them are bowing out of this deal. And so that's what they did. They just kind of did a rhino thing. And now that they see that they're going to win, they join back.
Yeah.
You guys caught what I was talking about, right? Okay. Sorry about bringing that in. I just see that all the time. I shouldn't, but, it's fun. All right. Anyway, they were previously joining the Philistines. They come back, went up with them all around in the camp. Even they also turned to be with the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. The traitors come back. When all the men of Israel who had hidden themselves, remember those guys? A lot of them hid. They didn't join the other guys, but they just hid out. They joined themselves with them in the old country of Ephraim because they know they got a victory. Because guess who's on the run? The Philistines. Philistines are mighty. Tens of thousands of them.
They got chariots and stuff.
Wow. Oh, yeah. And remember the technology.
Yeah.
It's the Iron Age for them. Israelites don't have any iron instruments at all. So they pursued them closely in the battle. So the Lord delivered Israel that day, and the battle spread beyond Bethaven. I want to tell you something. They're heading east. Where do the Philistines live? West, on the coast. You know, the left coast? The west coast. California is out that way. The California Philistines. And they're running east because they're just trying to get out of this deal. So the Israelites are chasing them that way. You know what's east? This is what is interesting. Mountains. And that's what's going to clue us in on what's going to happen next. When you get into the mountains of El, how easy it is to just run up and down those mountains, right? Yes. But usually, if you're climbing those things up, you're not going to be running up those.
Your back's kind of
Where you kind of have to do some climbing and such. You would be slow, wouldn't you? Hey, by the way, did you happen to carry any candy bars or anything with you?
I mean, I had my backpack. It was like an extra 50 pounds.
Did you get a little weak sometimes climbing up those mountains?
Actually, no. I mean, kind of.
You're destroying it, man. Come on.
Kind of like during the incline a little bit, but then once I got used to like my breathing and everything, I mean, it got easier.
But it was a little tiring, right? If you would have done that for
I think only on
24 hours, would you have gotten tired?
Oh yeah.
Oh, there we go. Now we're talking.
Definitely on the decline, like going down the hill was more. That was more challenging than going up, just because I had extra gear on and my legs weren't really like all that pressure of going down. I could feel it coming back up my legs. So going up wasn't an issue, but coming down was I think that was more challenging.
Really have to be careful, don't you?
Yeah.
And the Israelites have a lot of baggage they're carrying, you know,
Armor
too.
on. They got
Taking that armor and what they have, you know, right? So, okay. Anyway, this looks like certain victory, and there they are. They got them on the run, and they're up in the mountains. It's going to take a lot of energy to chase after them and then start climbing these mountains and trying to battle and fight them. So that sets us up for this foolish oath that Saul makes. We saw Saul in his glory at his very first victory, didn't we? And we were going, yay! It's really about just downhill for Saul from here on out. You don't see a lot of good things about Saul from here. He's a foolish man. He is not a man of God in the sense that he is really wanting God's will. He calls the shots, and it's always wrong. And he's against the wrong people, his own son, which he does the same thing with David, who are people looking out for his best interest. The guy does not use God's wisdom. So here we go. Watch this. Now the men of Israel were hard pressed on that day, even though they're chasing the enemy and they've got victory. They had Saul had put the people under oath, saying, "Cursed be the man who eats food before evening, and until I have avenged myself on my enemies." So none of the people tasted food. Now do you see what I was getting at? Yeah, he didn't let them eat. They didn't eat anything that day. They're in the mountains. They're chasing the enemy. They're in war.
I'll go to fast. Time to get fast.
They could have just destroyed a lot of enemies. Really, it was very limited on what they did. They could have gotten much of the Philistine army just taken care of if it would have been handled right, and if Saul wouldn't have done this stupid, foolish oath. What an order it is. It's absolutely insane. This is what you have when you have an insane leader. They do the stupidest things. And it's the army that he's calling for, for them to do that. All the people of the land entered the forest. Look at this. And there was honey on the ground. I want to tell you, supernatural. This is flowing out of the forest. You don't see honey like this.
Yeah, what a delicious temptation.
Oh, yeah.
It has all the energy stuff that it offers.
What did the people do? Well, they didn't need it.
They fell on it.
They could have used, this would have been instant energy. Honey is so nutritious, and with all the sugar that's going in there, you're going to get enough to help you go through the rest of the day. But Saul came out with that stupid command. So all the people entered the forest, and there was honey on the ground. When the people entered the forest, behold, look at this, wow, exclamation points. Remember all the comic books where you'd see bam, zow, pow, with the exclamation point? That's what behold is here. Check this out. There was a flow of honey on the ground. God has caused an earthquake. Who knows? Maybe the earthquake caused the honeybees, the hives to, the combs and everything, drop right down. Who knows? There was a flow of honey. But no man put his hand to his mouth, for the people feared the oath. But Jonathan had not heard when his father put the people under oath, because Jonathan is not really playing by his father rules. He's going out and he's conquering the Philistines. He didn't hear anything about that. Well, what does he do? Kind of reminds you of somebody else in the book of Judges, which talked about honey, in the lion and such. Samson, right? Jonathan had not heard when his father put the people under oath. Therefore, he put out the end of the staff that was in his hand and dipped it in the honeycomb and put his hand to the mouth, and his eyes brightened. All of a sudden, it was just like, boom, He had all this energy. He's ready. Let's go. How many seconds did that take? 5 seconds? He's ready to go. Okay, we see what he did. And his armor bearer, I'm sure. Then one of the people said, your father strictly put the people under oath, saying, cursed be the man who eats food today. And the people were weary. They are pooped out. They're about dead. What was it? Faint. What words do you guys have? Faint, weary, faint. There, Penny?
Yeah.
Faint. Everybody else saying faint. Then, and I'm sure Jonathan said, oh my, I shouldn't have done that. My dad said that? Oh, my dad, I'm so sorry. No. Jonathan said, my father has troubled the land. See now how my eyes have brightened because I tasted a little of this honey. Do you see how much energy I have? You know, this is what we need. It took second. We're talking fast food, folks. This is God's fastest food.
Sugar digests into the body.
Boom.
Fastest, right?
Fast as can be, isn't it?
Yep.
We know about that. Exactly. And that's what they needed. God had it all planned for the army to do that. It's going to take a day. You go out and get them. You're going to the mountains. You're going into no man's land. But they're out there. Well, that stupid Saul. He didn't seek after God's will, and if he did, he probably wouldn't have got it anyway. But so he calls the shots, right? He's hindering the soldiers here. And so God has the fastest food available anywhere. A flow of honey in the midst right there, and it, there Jonathan's placed it into his mouth. There's no finer food around for this, right? This natural, I guess you could say, nutrition, which was just perfect. So, my father has troubled the land. How much more, in verse 30, if only the people had eaten freely today of the spoil of their enemies, which they found. For now the slaughter among the Philistines has not been great. We could have taken them down. We could have taken them all. But everybody is dead tired. They're weary. They can't go any further. So what do? Of course, they struck among the Philistines that day from Michmash to Ajalon, and the people were very weary. So they've been taking some people out, but it wasn't great. The people rushed greedily upon the... Now look what they do. They rushed greedily upon the spoil and took sheep and oxen and calves and slew them on the ground, and the people ate them with the blood. That's going against the law of God.
It's also disgusting.
It's disgusting. Just taking raw meat, killing the animals, just taking it out, just start eating it.
They broke their covenant anyway.
Right.
If you're going to break your covenant, I would have probably marked that out. I saw Jonathan do it.
I'd go got some
You know
honey.
Jonathan, that was pretty man.
Your eyes do.
I would say, Jonathan, drink that honey.
I mean, at least take some in a bottle or something.
Yeah.
It was on his spear, the honeycomb.
What would have happened if they all would have been able to get from that flowing honey? It would have been enough for everybody. It's all 600 of them. Get the thousands. It would have been, boom, energy, let's move on. What they did is they stopped, they slew the animals because they'd gotten so weak because of the stupid oath they finally ate anyway. Okay, and of course you could go back to the Levitical law, and of course you know what the Levitical law is saying there. Saul had troubled the land. He's got a foolish father. They get victory, but it's not great. They could have done huge damage on the Philistines. And I want to tell you, from here on out, for the rest of the time, and it's going to be a long time, that Saul reigns, he's going to have to be fighting these Philistines from here on out. they would have taken care of him at this time, it would have been all over with those guys. They were a constant thorn in their side all the way through. Victory would have been great. But you know what? He gives hindrance to them, but yet Israel gets victories anyway in spite of their king. He still gets some victory. So anyways, verse 33, then they told Saul, saying, behold, there we go again. Look, check this out. The people are sinning against the Lord. They were so famished. They're eating the blood. And he said, you have acted treacherously. Roll a great stone to me today. Saul said, disperse yourselves among the people and say to them, each one of you bring me his ox or his sheep and slaughter it here and eat. And do not sin against the Lord by eating with the blood. Stop them now. Let's go ahead and sacrifice animals and let's eat. Well, this is going to take a while.
Okay, so who are the snitches?
Some of the people, I guess, they're, like
And
that.
They had the
told
evidence
Saul.
on them.
Yeah.
But Saul probably wasn't right there.
Then
He was
who
hanging
told
back.
Saul? They.
Somebody
Who are
tells
they?
somebody that had been there.
Another tree.
Some of his helpers told him what they were.
Saul was probably munching on that honey.
He was probably back there eating a regular meal. When
You've acted treacherously, that's what he says. He says, okay, everybody get their own animal, bring it here, and then we're going to do it right. Now what they're going to do is they're going to have to sacrifice, then they're going to have to, it's going to take a while for that meat to roast, right? This is not a fast food. This is a full sit-down meal that has to be cooked. So they go through all of this ordeal. Now, who's losing time? They could have been long gone if Saul had been in tune with God's will. Had he maybe listened to Jonathan, his son. So all the people that night brought each one his ox with him, slaughtered it there, and Saul built an altar to the Lord. It was the first altar that he built to the Lord. Oh, man, that's, it's an inexcusable thing that he did already. The order resulted in sinning. The people had to have food. They're so desperate, they just kill the animal and start eating it raw right there.
And this would explain exactly why Jonathan buddied up so much with David.
Bingo. And matter of fact, did you look down there at the conclusion?
Not yet.
If you look at the second one there, where it says first and then it'll say second, sets the stage for the introduction to David. David and Saul are going to be the best of friends because they think alike. What do they think? They think about God's will. And how cool it is when two brothers in the Lord, 3, 4, whatever, get together and they talk about the things of the Lord. Sisters, same thing, isn't it? It's the best thing that can happen, isn't it? It's like magic. Well, it's supernatural is what it is. They want to do God's will, and you're right on the head there, Avil. That is one of the concluding positive notes we get out of this. Because we're seeing really a very godly man in Jonathan and doing what he's doing. He's just doing what he knows is right. Because he knows God's character. He knows God's will, his word. They're supposed to go defeat the enemy. Don't be afraid. And when they took on the enemy with those rocky crags up there, nobody takes on the enemy when they're up there looking down on you. You don't have a chance. Jonathan says it's in the hand of God. Yeah. So, that's overwhelming there. You see the character of Jonathan. And that's what we look at the contrast last week. So, you can hardly call this a sincere worship where Saul builds an altar. He said, well, isn't that nice? Finally, he's doing the things of God here. He knows it's God that's going to deliver them, right? Well, it's merely a way of sanctifying the satisfaction of the appetites of those who, they had sinned out there doing what they did. He knows they sinned, and he's mad at them because he did that. At the same time, he says, okay, let's do it right then. And, this first altar that Saul has built, we're not impressed with this altar of his.
Especially it's the first time. He should have been building altars a lot.
Yeah, why is he doing it now then?
Yeah.
So it takes this kind of crisis for Saul to seek to worship God. Altars in times of crisis, right? Well, I would not call this a holy moment. Sounds good, but it's really not. You ever seen people when things come to a point where they cry out to God, and all of a sudden they want to do right, and
Fix it all.
God is the answer to all. I can do whatever I want. Whoops, we got sin in the camp. We better do this, because we got an enemy to defeat, right?
Well, you'd said the other day about the ark, how they kind of viewed the ark. It was just like a kind of
Magic potion.
magic potion. And that's the same thing I think this is with him. What do you do when you made God mad? Let's go get a sacrifice to make it all better.
Yep.
It's not of a reverence at all.
The enemy's getting away now.
Right, but he's doing this like, well, they've sinned, so now we got to. Let's do an altar. Let's make it look right. But he has no reverence for God. He didn't sit there and say, ask for do it in a way that was respectful to who God was, as
Right.
in we've all sinned and I was wrong.
Well, we look at it and you say, well, Saul didn't know the honey was there. The only thing is that he couldn't get God's will. He really wasn't seeking God's will in that. He saw about this, he's just ready to go out after him, and they did. That they had victory.
After Saul made that sacrifice that he wasn't supposed to make, Samuel told him, God's no longer on your side here, buddy.
Yeah. Right.
Exactly. He left him, didn't he?
Yeah. Because
He's out. You're on your own.
Because he didn't do it right then.
even when Saul calls out to God and seeks an answer, God's like, I'm not going to answer you because you're not going to listen anyway. You didn't listen before. You're not going to listen now. Do whatever you want. Be a thorn in everybody's side. And then when David comes around, I'll make him king.
In the meantime, you've got Jonathan out there, and he's doing
And remember,
God's will.
They should never had a king to begin with.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't look for a human to give them direction. They would look to him. And then,
Which is kind of funny because their first king ever, God was like, I'm not listening. I'm not answering you anymore. I'm done talking to you.
That's it. That's really it for here on out, basically. Yeah.
You had King David, which was a good king. And then you had maybe like 4 or 5 kings after
you had
that.
a really bad one, then you had a good one,
Not
then you had a really
necessarily
bad one,
good,
then you had
bad,
a good
good,
one.
bad. It was more like good, a lot of bad ones, and then one good one,
Yeah.
more bad ones, and then you had one more good one.
It was rare to have a good king.
Not very many of them were buried with the kings. Only the ones that pleased God. And it says, that they were buried with the kings. Well, the rest of them were just buried with
That's right.
everyone else.
The 10 tribes that went north, none of those kings were good, because that was all idolatrous. It was the wrong kind of worship and everything. So they had none. Judah and Benjamin had
At least.
occasionally some here and there, but it was very rare. Well, how long do you think the meal, now that they're finally eating, how long do you think it took?
3 hours?
5, 6
Oh,
hours.
probably longer than that.
Where's the enemy going to go within that time? They're
5
get,
or 6
They gotta
hours.
roast like a whole freaking
Yeah.
animal. Like,
I mean, unless you
It's gonna take a while.
Yeah.
Yep.
I would chop it up into
Hours.
pieces.
yeah, but how many animals are they?
You're doing a barbecue.
Are
They're
they
doing a
roasting?
whole.
Everybody's bringing their own.
Everyone's bringing their own.
Their own.
Doing strips, carne asada style.
They're having a feast.
They're probably just putting it on a
Yeah.
on a
While
spike.
everybody else is waiting over here munching.
Would you say that this would be inefficient what Saul has done?
Yes, the honey would have been faster.
Boy, they could have been making it going great, couldn't they?
And then they're gonna feel sluggish after eating all that meat.
That's
Right. The honey would have just
weights
given
them down.
the energy they needed and without weighing them down.
God had provided, hadn't he? How often sometimes we miss what God provides.
Listen to our Evolution, guys!
Isn't this an interesting story? There's a lot of humor in it, as you can see it. But it's sad too, But here we go. Verse 36. Then Saul said, oh boy, here he's speaking again. Let us go down after the Philistines by night. Okay. Take spoil among them until the morning light. Let us not leave a man of them. And they said, do whatever seems good to you. So the priest said, let us draw near to God here. Saul inquired of God, shall I go down after the Philistines? Will you give them into the hand of Israel? But here you go. Avel, what does God do? But he did not answer him on that day.
Why didn't Saul ask Jonathan what he was explaining?
Maybe he's on to something.
So Jonathan, if that was you, what would you do?
I mean, this is a full day already, and they just got a meal, and he wants them to go out and fight at night when you're supposed to be sleeping.
Well, they used to do that a lot.
I know they used to do that.
They would attack people while they were sleeping.
I think he should have just went and talked to Jonathan a little bit and asked him.
Whatever it is, he is not going to get an answer from God. Jonathan would know what to do. So what does Saul do? Let's take it out. Somebody really caused the sin here. So before you guys go, till we go out into battle, we got to find out who really messed up. You know who he's already thinking that it is? It's his son. And look what he says. And it's not surprising. Saul said, draw near here. Verse 38, right? All you chiefs of the people, and investigate. See how this sin has happened today. Their sin, with the blood and everything. But there's why did you guys do it? What really happened? What sin really happened? And he's going to blame it on somebody, one person. For as the Lord lives, oh boy, who delivers Israel, though it is in Jonathan my son, he shall surely die. He's not saying it is Jonathan, but what's he thinking in his head? It's Jonathan. Even if it be my son, I don't care who it is. Even if it's my son, he deserves death.
Notice how he didn't say himself. Even if it's
myself, he didn't say himself, did he?
Right. Even if it's me, Lord, you take me down.
Obviously, it was my son, God. My son did it.
No, the one you gave.
It's all.
Not to eat, and they didn't listen to me.
Do you remember in the book of Judges, there was a foolish oath done by an individual who had the daughter? Remember that stupid kind of thing? Well, here he is now. He's done that oath. Now he does something else that's just absolutely foolish in saying that person is going to have to die. And even if it's my son,
I hope it's not.
I hope it's not. He would die. I mean this. But not one of the people answered him. Nobody is in agreement with the king. He doesn't take counsel. He doesn't use wisdom here. He makes these things up. Did this come from God? No, God's not even talking to him. You'd think he'd at least go out and start getting some counsel from people. Let's check this out. What do you think about this idea? Saul, I don't think that's a good idea at all. What do you think? That's not a good idea, Saul. What do you think? Not a good idea. Jonathan, what do you think? Well, he said to all Israel, you shall be on one side, and I and Jonathan on the other. We're going to find out who it is. It's funny, he splits them up, and so it's him and Jonathan. It's just funny how all this works out. And of course, as they throw the lots, the people say, do what seems good to you. we're not really thinking this is a good idea, but you're the king. They're afraid to challenge him, right? Okay. Therefore Saul said to the Lord, the God of Israel, give a perfect lot. Well, and Jonathan and Saul were taken. Now it's the two. It's boiled down to two real quickly. Imagine that. They were taken, but the people escaped. So now all of them are out of the way in one shot like that. Saul said, cast lots between me and Jonathan, my son. Jonathan was taken. Funny how that came out, isn't it? I think there is some shenanigans going on here.
I want to recount.
Exactly. He wants to kill his son, folks, in front of everybody.
And justify himself. Somehow.
And he's absolutely justified.
He's mad at his son. He's just angry because his son
Knows the
was
will of
gone
God.
twice and started beef, which was supposed to be started because the king is lacking on it.
And who's getting the glory out of
Yeah.
all this?
Yeah.
Jonathan
embarrassed,
is.
Saul.
Really, I mean, he would
He's
give it to
embarrassed.
God, but Saul is made to look like an idiot all the way through this thing. Everything that he's done has been wrong.
Yep.
So, Saul, at verse 43, Saul said to Jonathan, tell me what you have done. So Jonathan told him and said, I indeed tasted a little honey with the end of the staff that was in my hand. Here I am. I must die. Is it okay?
I mean, he owns up.
You know what? He is giving himself up to God. He has all the way through. There's no way that he had a chance against the Philistines. And now no way right here. And he says, okay, if it's God's will, I'll die. If it's not God's will, I won't. Here it is, right here. God's in control of this. I mean, this man, his points are going up in my thoughts more and more every time I look at him before I know that when he runs into David. You know, I kind of forgot about all these parts right here about Jonathan before he even met David. And when they get together, man, they are quite a team. So, he says, here I am, I must die. Saul said, may God do this to me, and more also for you shall surely die, Jonathan. That's what he wants. This man wants his son dead.
Father to his son.
Because he's jealous.
Yeah.
Do you think Biden's going to do that for his son?
Maybe.
Well, he might. He might do that.
That
Walk
sounds
around
a pretty big
delusion.
embarrassment.
Really?
Delusion.
Boy, he's feeling like
President,
he's going to have to
American
disappear.
Will never see punishment one.
Well, Joe's walking around delusion.
But the people said to Saul, now here's where they finally rise up. This is the majority of the people. And this is what it takes. Must Jonathan die, who has brought about this great deliverance in Israel?
Right. Don't you know?
Look at the victory you have.
Don't you
Far from it, as the Lord lives.
know?
Not one hair of his head shall fall to the ground, for he has worked with God this day. The people speak. Do you think the king can take on all the people? If you'd have all of America going saying, this is not going to happen. Our desires are this. You have seen our votes.
Or our rallies. Or our, yeah.
Anyway, they did what was right, didn't they? Because they knew what was right. And they knew all along if they would have done the honey thing, they would have gone on to complete victory. No way. You don't even touch his hair on his head. He's worked, and look at this. For he has worked with God this day. That's what the people say, and they're right. So the people rescued Jonathan, and he did not die. How many times does Saul want to kill David later on? He's a murderer at heart. He's an evil man. Then Saul went up from pursuing the Philistines, and the Philistines went to their own place. Back to battle, and here we have the casting of lots. It's no surprise, and then it comes down to where we see Saul has been foolish. The people come up with, the deliverance of Jonathan, stand up for him. They are not going to allow Saul to put his son to death.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting because he's the king,
Mm-hmm.
and they went against
They
him.
wanted a king. And now, what do you think they're thinking about? If he wants to kill his son, what would he do with us? This man has gone crazy. Wow. Nothing he does is right.
He's power
It's all
hungry.
wrong.
He's power hungry.
Yeah. Yeah, and he takes all the credit for anything whenever it does go good. But he's tired of Jonathan getting recognized by the people. So we finish with this. Now with this, and here it covers on to the end of Saul's life. We'll have more chapters dealing with this, but it covers what happened during the time of this. It looks like he has success throughout his career. Now when Saul had taken the kingdom over Israel, he fought against all his enemies on every side, against Moab, the sons of Ammon, Edom, the kings of Zobah, and the Philistines. And wherever he turned, he inflicted punishment. How would you like to have China and Russia and the all the Middle East nations all around us while we're living here, always battling against us? How would you like that? Fortunately, we have no enemies that are all around us. Unfortunately, the enemies are within. We don't see them. Actually, we do see them. China is here. They've arrived. They've been here for decades now. But the thing is, they constantly had to be fighting. He acted valiantly, defeated the Amalekites, delivered Israel from the hands of those who plundered them. So a lot of the enemies he took care of. Now the sons of Saul were Jonathan and Ishbi and Malchishua, and the names of his two daughters were these: the name of the firstborn, Merab, and the name of the younger, Michal. We will see her later. David is interested in her. So interested that takes her as a wife. The name of Saul's wife was Ahinoam, the daughter of Ahimaaz, and the name of the captain of his army was, take note of this, Abner, the son of Ner, Saul's uncle. So they're cousins, aren't they? Kish was the father of Saul, and Ner, the father of Abner, was the son of Abiel. Now the war against the Philistines was severe all the days of Saul. And when Saul saw any mighty man or any valiant man, he attached him to his staff. He brought him right on in. That's a pretty good idea, but they had to fight constantly, always. How foolish Saul was in his actions. So, the summary of his success here: the battle was over, but not the war. The Philistines suffered a great loss, but not a total defeat. And they were going to be a pain in their side for the rest of Saul's life. David will have to battle them. Two nations continue at war with each other. It could have been taken care of. There will be conflict. Saul's respect for the Philistines can be seen by the fact that he has to go out and get the valiant men, great warriors, constantly. What's the consequences of Saul's folly? Well, it followed him all the days of his life. How would you like to be in constant battle, constant war, all your life as being a king?
Like that was sin.
What's that?
So doesn't it already feel like that was sin?
Yeah. That's really what it is with us. We're battling sin all the time, aren't we?
But we
That's
also,
life. It
but-
seems like.
but we also have rest because of Jesus Christ. You know, the battle is the Lord's, though, too.
We rest in the Lord in that sense. So I've got this conclusion here, and we won't go through all of them, but it's not difficult to see why Jonathan and David will become devoted friends. The text set the stage for the introduction of David in 16:7. So exactly what Avell said earlier. Very first 2 points we got as the conclusion there is the fact that this is going to help us see why they are such friends, godly as they are. And we see that in history's view of a man may differ greatly from God, right? He looks like he had success. He took on the enemies. He had some victories here and there. And God used him. God used Saul. That's why he called him to do that. But actually, God's will was going to be, when we see in Genesis 49, we read it last Sunday. It's who's the king going to be from? The tribe of Judah. Where is Saul from? Benjamin. God had it all in his mind, but yet he used Saul. He also used Samson. Samson is found in the Hebrews 11 Hall of Faith. Saul is not, but he did use Saul, and they did have victory, but it was tough. Fourth, we see that the Christians can and do act in a way that can hinder God's work and success. 5, Saul's rule is a source of great trouble for Israel, and it's the means to his own demise.
Do you think Saul was a believer or not?
He said he
He'll be in
was.
heaven or not?
Well, we talked about it that week, right? And we saw where he was believing in God. He was giving all the glory to God. And then we finally came to the conclusion it's very possible that he could be. I've always taken him as a clear no. But after reading that, I know, you have to have fruit to show that you're a Christian. The fruit thereafter doesn't look good at all. God used him. He can use believers, unbelievers.
Isn't it saying the New Testament? I don't know which, if it was the apostle, that we shouldn't go around assuming anybody is or isn't. Like, we shouldn't say that people are up or down, because that would be bringing Christ down or raising him up or something like that.
Because we don't know.
Yeah.
I'd rather not. I'd myself.
But this is in God's word, though, so you said that he kept using it for
We-
an example.
I
You
mean-
gotta go,
And you're
okay.
right. We
Yeah,
are
yeah.
fruit inspectors, and when we see
Right.
the fruit and it doesn't look good, we can say, and believe me, there's a lot of times when we can say, no, they're not a believer.
Right.
First of all, they don't even confess it, But what if they deny the deity of Christ? What if they deny heaven and hell? What if they deny God's word and all
We
that?
don't have to hang
Then,
around them.
all I have to do is say, well, they're not. If they don't confess Christ,
Right. If they don't repent.
then we know they're not believers.
Right. And
Right.
that I get that that's the difference, but like.
Right.
It's like a
Concerning
fine
certain,
line, I guess.
because it even says that each one of us should work out our own salvation with fear and
Fear
trembling.
and trembling.
You know?
And you're right. Finally, we realize that God makes the judgment, and that's the whole story of what, Debbie, what you're asking there. I can't say for sure, but I can't say that, no. I used to do it way back in my very early days as a Christian. I would say it because of all of these things and through the time of David, and then he committed suicide. But knowing the text of that suicide, I can understand it. The enemy was going to make worse light of it. So, but because of the suicide, I used to even think that if you committed suicide, then you couldn't be a believer. Well, I don't even know about that. I'm not saying that, hey, you can go ahead and commit suicide. That's a good thing to do. It's okay. It's a sin, but God will let you. But the thing is that after it's all said and done, you look at all the commentaries, most people will say, and it's what Avell said and what we have said before, we still can't even make a final judgment on people. We can say, well, here's what they always said, that they didn't believe in God. Or we say, but there could have been a time just before they died that they confessed Christ. And he takes those kind of confessions, not likely, but he sure does. He's a God of grace. So ultimately, we can't make that final judgment.
Right.
It's only God who does.
But
Well,
we can also.
and being a fruit inspector is not always the greatest either, because there are times that, if you looked at my fruit at certain times, you would think maybe I wasn't a Christian. 'cause my fruit ain't
There's
so
other
good.
times that you
Yeah.
can look at the fruit and it really looks good.
Yeah,
And it's
And
fake.
and it's phony.
Artificial.
phony.
It's wet.
It's rotten inside.
Right.
Looks good on the outside.
Right. So,
I mean, I think of Mother
Yeah.
Teresa. What do you do when she says there's more than one way to get to heaven?
yeah.
Well, my judgment is
They can't
she
do that.
does not believe Jesus.
It's not true.
Jesus is not the only way.
Yeah.
He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So as far as I'm concerned, and my thought is, no, she's not a believer. I could be wrong in that, but see, they're doing it because of her works
Yeah.
and not by the grace of God. She says other people get to heaven in other ways.
Everybody
They
goes
all
to
have
God,
their
their
own way, and
ways.
that to me is an offense to my Savior, Jesus Christ. And to me, if they ask me, I say, here's what she says. If it's works, if you get to heaven that way,
Very busy.
then
Good
then
luck.
all of this means nothing.
Yeah,
Grace
good luck.
means nothing. So that would be my thought. Could she be saved?
She got a long time in purgatory to figure it out.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
but there's one where you see all kinds of good works.
Oh,
all
great
kinds of
works.
fruit.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But
Fruit looks great.
the comments don't match the Word of God.
Yeah, so,
Exactly.
you know,
Have
Even
troubles
Jesus
with that.
says, deny my Father and deny me.
Mm-hmm.
He'll forgive those, but deny the Holy Spirit and there'll be no forgiveness. So, I mean,
We can't
Yep.
judge other people. We can't judge.
So what's the ultimate thought on it? I'm glad God is the judge and I am not. Because I'm afraid that I might be really wrong on a lot of people.
But if we go by her philosophy, it wasn't a Christian philosophy.
Right. And we have to judge in that way.
Right.
Not my job.
And that's the way that God wants us to judge
I mean, what would
according
be
to
the
His
point
Word.
in my
His
judging whether
it's not about.
Mother Teresa was a Christian? What is the point in that?
I mean, because you have to.
Who cares what I think?
I mean,
Bottom line is, not my job.
Yeah, and are you following her? Are you following
Yeah.
Christ?
Yeah.
So it always goes back to Him,
You can't
doesn't
be
it?
saved because I'm saved.
Yeah.
You have to be saved because you're saved.
Well,
no one knows, right? No one knows what's happening
That becomes
inside.
important when you've got people that you're
Just like
witnessing
he said,
to
like
that
he said.
Try to use that for